we have to be careful, right? First of all, the real world data that is used to train or generate that synthetic data should be of high enough quality, and should represent the statistical signals that you're interested in. Otherwise, you'll end up with a synthetic data set that might put you on the wrong foot.
Harry Keene, founder of synthetic data pioneer Hazy, and Dr. Mark Lambrecht, SAS's global head of health and life sciences, share how they saw the AI wave 10 years early and what health leaders must do now to stay ahead in the decade to come. Harry, you founded a synthetic data company that was ultimately acquired. What opportunity did you see early on that perhaps others didn't?
Yeah, so we started what was originally called Hazy back in 2017 when we spotted this challenge around sharing data quickly and easily. And we saw it in a very sort of small use case initially. We were working at another startup and we were trying to work with remote software developers, wanted to give them access to our kind of customer database, but couldn't find a quick and easy way to anonymize it so we could share it with them without thinking twice, if you know what I mean. So we set up to sort of solve that challenge, and we were using some of the early kind of named entity recognition technologies to try and figure out where personal data was, and then doing simple sort of redaction techniques. But we quite quickly realized that there's a much bigger opportunity in the sort of world of AI and data science. So imagine if you could produce these safe data sets that you could ultimately feed into the sort of growing world and sort of data hungry applications around AI. So we realized quite quickly that the kind of concept of just kind of redacting data was going to sort of destroy too much information. And about the same time, this whole class of generative algorithms was coming out as well, where you could ultimately kind of replicate the statistical quality of the synthetic data, of the real data that you're working with, without compromising the kind of privacy and the sort of identity of the people in that real data set. So it became a sort of marrying a really new kind of cutting edge technology with a kind of old and existing problem, which was a sort of a growing problem, as it were.
You helped us a little bit. Can you dive in a little bit deeper to help me understand what synthetic data is and sort of where it plays in that? I think there are some big headlines that we've seen. One is about that anonymized data, that there was a country that used it for some of the health information, and it got sort of re-anonymized or de-anonymized. It was tracked back to the real data very quickly once it was out in the public. And so there was some fear on that side of it. And then there's some fear, maybe because of that, but there's been some headlines around kind of backlash for fake data of, we already have mountains of real data, we don't need this data. Where does synthetic data fit into sort of those two extremes?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, synthetic data, the way it works is you take a real data set, you train a generative algorithm against that source data to understand all of the sort of statistical patterns, correlations, distributions within those data. And then that model effectively captures that information, and you can sort of ask that model to generate sort of row by row of totally synthetic, totally made up data records that individually they won't exist in real life. They'll just sort of look realistic because it's sort of the model has learned what a realistic data record should look like. And then you can keep on generating these records and you end up with a fully synthetic data set that's critically doesn't contain any of the real information, but does preserve the statistical characteristics. Now, within that process, we also apply a privacy technique called differential privacy, which provides a sort of mathematical guarantee around the sort of level of privacy that you're achieving. So to come back to your point there, so the sort of where does synthetic data sit on a spectrum? Because there's very, very valid concerns from that have been around for a while with anything to do with anonymization. You're always trading off between privacy on the one hand and utility on the other. So if you dial privacy right up, you just delete the data set. If you dial it right down again, you would have a totally raw data set, but is totally unprivate. So somewhere in the middle, you've got a trade-off between the two. So synthetic data with differential privacy is the most efficient way to make that trade-off. So you can end up with a useful data set for tons of use cases whilst preserving the privacy of the individuals within that. So it's it's a kind of a complex answer, really, to quite a simple question. But synthetic data has its uses, and it's you've got to understand its limitations as well, and depending on which use case you're going to apply it to.
Mark, let's talk about some of those uses in the healthcare and life sciences realm. Has synthetic data become an area of interest in these organizations that you're working with? And maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, we'll give you this scale as well. So 10 being most interested, where are we in the either interest or adoption for synthetic data?
I think we could say, Alex, that we're at a 4 or 5. Yes, there is interest with all of the executives and decision makers and users that we're talking to about synthetic data. But it's really only starting. And of course, healthcare and life sciences needs to deal, as Harry has explained, with a lot of things here, not in the least ensuring that patient information cannot be de-identified. And so there is interest, but out of a survey that we did of almost 500 decision makers in the industry, we see that more than 75% of those decision makers are really busy in terms of AI with how can I guarantee security? And that's where partially synthetic data comes in. We see that regulators are talking about it. FDA, European Medicines Agency for pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies are using it because there's a big promise of using so-called electronic health records and combining that with other types of data. But I think synthetic data now has some narrow scoped applications, such as the ability to avoid bias, to test out certain algorithms, AI algorithms, and kind of dry run them before you can actually apply them in real life. It's also being used for a number of other areas to, for example, if you have underrepresented populations, like in rare diseases, where you can look at, you can really increase the data from that underrepresented population and ensuring that you will detect the actual signal once you apply it to a real life situation. So apart from these narrow scope applications, there's definitely a lot of interest, and it's not new, right? Even in academia, synthetic data has been looked at for many purposes. But what you're really seeing is that industry is now jumping on the bandwagon as well.
Really exciting, and sounds like very early days still. So some adoption, but quite a bit of interest. Harry, at the same time, there's industries that are further ahead on the both interest and adoption curve in their use of synthetic data than healthcare and life sciences, certainly. I think in the press release, there's financial services, insurance, telecoms. They've been early movers. What lessons can healthcare, can life sciences learn from those industries that are already further along that adoption curve?
Yeah, I think it's really important to, and this is a kind of a learning curve that all organizations go on, is the sort of when you describe the benefits of synthetic data, it sounds like a magic bullet to sort of every single potential problem. And that's just not the case. There's a set of use cases and applications where it's really, really good, and others where it won't be applicable. So you need to think really carefully about the sort of utility requirements of the use case. Does this data need to be hyper representative, or can we live with, because this is an experimentation use case, we can live with a 2% reduction in accuracy of the models it's going to produce, because it's ultimately just a testing exercise. What are the privacy requirements? Are we sharing this externally? Is this internal? So you really weigh these things up to understand whether synthetic data is actually going to be appropriate for the particular use case. And that just takes a little bit of experience and certainly a bit of expertise, the types of expertise that SAS can provide, to sort of assess these initial use cases. So just being able to save a huge amount of time in these applications and projects, just with a discounting synthetic data as a way to speed up the process, or including it at an early stage. And that also, if you get these decisions right early, you save a whole series of explanations, and ultimately build trust that this can be a useful technology for the specific problems you're applying it to. So it's all about that process, just understanding the sort of scope and limitations of the technology, and then applying that in a sensible way.
Mark, what are the limitations healthcare and life sciences wise? Where should synthetic data, we've talked a little bit about where it can be used, rare disease and some of the other opportunities. Where should it not be used in healthcare?
Yeah, I think well, first of all, we're very happy to have that Hazy IB available to us and to be able to apply it to healthcare and life sciences. But we have to be careful, right? First of all, the real world data that is used to train or generate that synthetic data should be of high enough quality, and should represent the statistical signals that you're interested in. Otherwise, you'll end up with a synthetic data set that might put you on the wrong foot. I don't think we need to replace it to really look at clinical signals. There's hesitation from medical doctors or clinicians that synthetic data would actually be used to derive real insights. That's not the goal. The goal here is to ensure that we can kind of dry run some of the processes, that we can avoid some of the bias that potentially might creep in and things like that. However, it's not really meant to replace the actual clinical data as such. Otherwise, we would not be doing clinical trials that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, of course. In addition, there are factions, rightfully so, in the clinical ecosystem that don't believe that even real-world data could replace clinical trials, let alone synthetic data as such, replacing those clinical data sets. Having said that, it's complementary, I think, and we need to install, as Harry rightfully explained, a trust-building exercise to show where it can build benefit, where it can complement certain techniques, and where it can fit in an end-to-end digital capability where you can apply analytics and broad sets of analytics on that type of data, both in healthcare and hospitals, to look at predicting whether patients will be highly susceptible to certain diseases or sepsis or have to come into the hospital again, or in pharma looking for responders to new therapies. So it doesn't really diminish all the other things you need to do. It just helps you to be more prepared for when the moment comes. And I really compare the ability to generate synthetic data is a bit like training before a big sports match. You won't start running a marathon without having trained. Well, you shouldn't start a clinical trial that costs hundreds of millions of dollars and implicates many patients and affects patients' lives as they sacrifice really their data, their lives to joining such an experiment. You shouldn't do that without having tested out all of the eventualities that would happen during that real life exercise as well. So that's where we really have to be careful and where we really have to watch out for overuse of synthetic data. It's definitely not a magic wand, but it is needed and helpful.
I won't be running a marathon even after training, so I think your example is spot on about that. It would be less painful if I did, I guess. I'm so excited to talk to both of you about the future. It seems obviously you created and you saw this need and this opportunity before others did, and we're very early on. And so I can't wait to hear what you think is coming next and what the next opportunities are. But before we get there, we're going to go into a speed round. So to get to know both of you a little bit, the first one, I think, speaks about what kind of data you consume. So Mark, what is your favorite app on your phone?
Well, I'll take a bit of liberty here, Alex, and take two. One is Substack. I love to go to Substack to read on and very high quality information. The other is Overcast. I find myself constantly opening Overcast. That's a podcast app, by the way, a very good one. So apart from this podcast, I listen to a lot of them, and so they're a bit my part of my habit, part of what I do.
Substack and Overcast. Harry, how about you?
For me, my favorite app is actually All Trails. I'm pretty sure you get that out in the US as well, right? But it's brilliant. I love technology that encourages more sort of outdoor activities, and it's incredible, the sort of community driven contributions to all of these different trail walks you can do around wherever you are. It's amazing the coverage they've got. So I would highly recommend it. It's a great way to get out and about.
All Trail. So you may have already answered the next one. Your favorite way to exercise?
Well, so I live in Lisbon now, and there's some great hiking and trails around here up in a beautiful place called Sintra. But this area of Portugal is really known for its surfing and its water sports as well. So that's trying to spend in between work and family, trying to spend as much time out on the water as well.
Did you hear that, Mark? I think there was a quiet moment there that we were invited to a surf trip in Portugal.
I'm all for it. I'm ready. Just say when.
Your favorite way to exercise, Mark?
I'm an avid badminton player, so I love that. So I do it a couple of times a week, and this is where all of the pressure from the hard work gets out.
All right, badminton is on as well. Are you a morning or a night person?
I am definitely, everyone who has worked with me in morning and early mornings knows that I'm a night person. I wake up at night, and I love it when everybody else is gone to bed and I can still work with the quiet of the night.
Harry, is there an entrepreneur story in here of all-nighters, or are you a morning person?
They definitely used to be. And then, I used to sort of think I was a morning person. But then, we had our daughter, and suddenly the mornings became a lot more difficult. So, I think I'm leaning more towards Mark's preference now as well.
All right. One place on your travel bucket list.
For me, well, I'd love to go to the Mentawais actually in Indonesia again to get it. Yeah, there's sort of have world class surfing out there. So that's it's a trip of a lifetime. I will do at some point when time allows.
I love that. I love the will do. Mark, how about you?
Tough choice, but for me it would be cherry blossom time in Japan. I'm a bit of an amateur photographer, and I would love to be there. But the problem with that is you need to be there at a very specific moment. That is when nature calls, right? They open up and then you have to be there. That's kind of tough to plan if you want to go to Japan, but want to go partially for the beautiful culture they have there, but also maybe to see their digital health ecosystem and learn a little bit more about that, because they have some things figured out pretty well.
Absolutely. All right, this is a guest favorite and a listener and viewer favorite. So we've got some avid fans that are dying to know the answer here of your favorite flavor of ice cream. Mark.
Well, I'm Belgian. We have a sort of ice cream, vanilla ice cream. It's called Dame Blanche, White Lady in French, and it's vanilla ice cream topped with melted, of course, Belgian hot, warm, dark chocolate. So that combination always gets me going.
All right, that might be an unfair advantage. There's a reason why it's Belgium chocolate all over the world is off the tip of your tongue. How about you, Harry?
Ooh, I think it would have to be hazelnut, actually. It's that kind of Ferrero Rocher flavor. I just find it absolutely delicious, and can have multiple scoops in one helping. So it's the sort of thing where once you get started, you can't stop. So it's something I try not to start too often.
Ice cream in all trails. I think it matches. You're balancing it out.
Exactly.
Harry, we had a guest that once said, I believe she was a hospital leader, and she had said, we don't need more data. We just need to better use the data we have. Do you come up against this sort of feeling that hospital, health plan, life science leaders, or could be financial services, do industry leaders tell you that? How do you overcome that objection? Can you say synthetic data helps with the data you do have, and here's what, or is it helping them prepare for the future?
Yeah, it's funny. I think you could see that as an objection. Quite often, the problem with trying to use the data they do have is that it's locked behind consents and controls and all of these barriers that make it very difficult to use the data that they do have, right? So actually, it can be slightly flipped, that challenge, and it can be an enabler ultimately to go and use the data you do have, because ultimately synthetic data is the data you do have, particularly if you're using it in a privacy preserving way. So it's an unlocker, and that should really be how it's seen. And of course, that doesn't touch on the potential additive use cases that Mark's mentioned around sort of augmenting data sets and balancing data, etc. But fundamentally, unlocking the data you do have can be achieved with synthetic data. So this is a way to enable that viewpoint, actually.
I love that. That's CEO, co-founder, and chief salesman for synthetic data. That was really helpful. Mark, if you were advising a hospital CEO or a pharma R&D leader, where would you tell them to start experimenting with synthetic data?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends a bit on indeed on what seat you're sitting, right? If you're a CIO of a hospital or a hospital health system, you're likely to already have quite good quality of healthcare data available. Nevertheless, the problem in healthcare and life sciences since many years I've been walking around is in this industry. Indeed, there is enough data. The problem is it's fragmented, it's in different formats, it's owned by different stakeholders that are not necessarily ready to give it up. So I think what I would be advising is to use synthetic data as a way to overcome some of those challenges, because we cannot stop, right? We cannot keep the patients waiting for therapies, or we cannot wait to provide them a better personalized journey into your hospital. So synthetic data is a way to test out your systems. It's kind of oil in the engine. It might not replace the actual gas that you need to keep the engine running, but it will definitely improve the efficiency of what you're doing. So that paradigm helps, and it's not a standalone thing. I think I would also advise to embed it in their AI governance infrastructure. Make it trustworthy, make it reliable, make sure that you got your data end-to-end chain of integrity in place as well, that you can show to the patients how you came to certain conclusions, and to your physicians as well. Also make it apparent where you use synthetic data and where not, so there is no distrust or nobody harmed in the process. So it's a matter of trying it out specifically. If you talk about very specific topics, clearly in clinical trials, for example, there is a lot of modeling and simulation going on. A lot of decisions have to be made that are high stakes. Lots of investment in certain trials. Where do you start? Where do you pick out the right trials and the right medicines? That's a daily concern for every C-level at a pharma company, for example. Synthetic data can help you to ensure that you reduce the risk. It won't take away the entire risk, but it can reduce the risk. And on the healthcare side, there's a lot coming to us. We're just at the start of combining the electronic health record, the record data that has been stored for years now, and to use it for personalized medicine, because we can really look at that as a predictor now, because of the way we combine it with other data, multimodal data coming from other areas like radiological data or other types of data from the patient. You might not have access to all of that data, so maybe synthetic data can start up that journey as well. So use it to experiment, to test, to fine-tune your approach would be my advice.
If you're still on the very sort of earliest days of this adoption, even interest process, and you're not involved in synthetic data now, are there things that executives can be doing today that will prepare them for broader adoption in the next 3 to 5 years? Is there infrastructure they need to be investing in? Is there data prep and cleansing and organizing that they should be doing now? Is there anything that you can advise them on if they haven't dabbled in the synthetic data world yet that would be beneficial?
From my end, it would be do what you're currently doing to prepare yourself for the whole generative AI implementation, I would say. Gen AI is not replacing the need to structure your data to ensure that your semantic layers are in place, that you understand where your data is. On the contrary, you need more governance, you need more guardrails, you need more combination with deterministic and other algorithms that are already existing. It's coming on top of it. It's not just putting aside the need to bring that in place. Same is true with the synthetic data. We get a lot of questions on, okay, we have these standards here, CDISC standards, and also in Europe with the European Health Data Space, you see these nations bringing together data from different countries. There's a lot of data engineering that will be needed, and even there, synthetic data can help, not just in the fancy algorithmic stuff, but just in testing out those data pipelines and making them more robust and testing them for errors, etc. So that's what I would keep doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think there's not a huge amount of difference here to preparing for a bigger sort of AI and enabled sort of organization in terms of the kind of infrastructure preparation, etc. But what I will say is synthetic data can be a part of that. So don't sort of wait. It's very easy to test and learn now today with the way data maker SaaS particularly is deployed and the support the SaaS can provide. So there's no need to hesitate in terms of bringing in some of that technical, legal, sort of commercial expertise and understanding what the sort of limitations and capabilities of synthetic data are. And then you know, whilst it can be seen as a bit of a sort of point solution to a particular use case at a particular moment in time, it's also, you know, could be starting to be seen as a more strategic technology that you can weave into bigger projects that Mark was mentioning there as well. So it's getting this expertise in-house and building up that sort of understanding is really critical. And that I would say there's no need to sort of wait for that to happen. So yeah, it can get cracking immediately.
We've talked about some potential risks. We've talked about some potential use cases and some of the potential objections. And I know you've turned that around a little bit, that objections can be opportunities and maybe there's limited knowledge or you just haven't been able to access this technology before. And so we've talked about some of that sort of earliest adoption curve. Let's go to the far end of the adoption curve. People that are gaining value from synthetic data today and that are saying this is a core part of our operations, is a core part of our research, it's a core part of our future. Harry, fast forward 10 years from now, how do you see synthetic data reshaping the future? Is this societal level change? And is this every organization will have simulations running on synthetic data alongside their data that they've got? Where do you see the future unfolding?
Yeah, well, I think it's the story of and the future of synthetic data is very intertwined with the story and future of AI in general. So I think, particularly in healthcare, I think it's not difficult to imagine quite a big transformation in the way diagnostics works and patient interactions, you know, all the way through to sort of hands-on things like surgery. So, and I think synthetic data will play a sort of an enabling part in all of that. I mean, if to be a bit more specific about synthetic data, I really do believe there's a kind of a very near-term world where organizations will operate a sort of synthetic twin of their data, of their infrastructure, and that will make experimentation and testing and bringing in some of these new technologies much quicker and easier with much less risk. So there's a future there that I think synthetic data really enables in a sense.
Really exciting. Mark?
Yeah, I clearly, I would like to give an example concretely of pharma, and that is in drug discovery. Today, synthetic data is starting to be used to develop chemical structures that do not exist yet in reality, and to test out whether they bind, for example, to a protein or a target in the body, and to see if that can become finally a therapy to affect a disease or downstream. So think about synthetic data as a way also to broaden the information space, to test out new approaches, even though you base it on real data that you can tweak to inform you of things, to be creative, really, in terms of what you're looking at in healthcare and life sciences. I think with all what we're hearing about quantum computing, about high performance computing in general, synthetic data will move along the real world techniques and analysis, such as the ability to combine different data sets, etc. But what we have to realize is that what we're testing out with patients is only a small fraction of what could be. And so by evolving synthetic data alongside, between quotes again, the real data, you'll be ready to test out things that you didn't know what would happen. What if a patient came in from a minority population that never was in that hospital, but that has a certain disease that you didn't see yet, etc.? What we need to be able to be ready for that as well, and more importantly, collaborate between healthcare systems, between countries. And I think synthetic data will help us to be the pioneering, to run ahead of where we can send the real world data. So I think it's really opening up a massive opportunity for life sciences and healthcare, and to vastly look into areas where we're not looking in today.
Well, Harry, we have your vision to thank for creating Hazy and creating this synthetic data opportunity for so many of our customers. I can't wait to experience the future that this enables for organizations to be able to find cures to rare diseases and to be able to find better interactions between patients and physicians. It just sounds tremendously exciting. And I love that you focused on how close it is. This isn't far off future. This is happening in organizations and in pockets around the world today, and will just continue in the future. And so Harry and Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to come with us on our Around the World surf trip or challenge us to a match of badminton, please let us know in the comments or send us an email, thehealthpulsepodcast@sas.com. See you next time.